find the decision popular. What we will have is discussion and probably some strong differences of opinion. I'll add that what I've tried to do for 8 years, and will try to do for 4 more if you choose to re-elect me, is to take every bit of information I have at my disposal to make decisions that are best for the city. And when I say best for the city, for me that tends to fall back on the phrase quality of life. I want Harrisonburg to be a place that gives people in the region a high-quality, small urban living option. If we can do that, we'll be okay, and I'm fully confident that if that's our standard, any near-term unpopularity or contentiousness will work itself out.
Dina?
Change is hard, and making an unpopular decision is also hard. But at times it is needed. So my unpopular decision, I don't consider it to be an unpopular decision, but it may be. But I feel that we have to fully fund our schools to maximize the potential of all of our students. And that means if we need to add an annex or build a new school, then that's what we need to do. I would simply convince people to support an increase in funding education by demonstrating that education is a non-negotiable. I believe we must provide the best education for our children. That is our responsibility. That means quality education and adequate space for them to learn. I have said this before. We have to make sure our kids are productive. If we don't, we will live with their destruction. We need to give all of our children the best opportunity in life, and there is no price tag on opportunity.
Oh,
I'm definitely with Dino on this one. I think the schools are a huge issue, and it's going to cost some money, and we're going to have to make some difficult decisions, whether or not we add on to the high school that we have and go down that road of having a very large high school, or having 2 high schools, and the costs that are incurred by each, and the pros and the cons. And this is a very long conversation, and as George pointed out, we also have a lot of immigrant families coming here with lots of children, and we're going to be serving these children in the public schools, and this is going to cause some issues for some people, I think, and potentially make this a unpopular item in our budget, because it's huge. We spend so much money on our schools. We employ so many people with our schools, and we educate all of these children with our schools. And so I think we need to be mindful of the children that are coming from overseas and refugee families, and make sure that they get the education that they deserve. They're going to be here, and they're citizens and residents.
and George.
Just one more phone call. Unpopular. Well, I'll tell you this. Recently, Petersburg, Virginia, which is south of Richmond, went under. It's a product of some fiscal stress over there. So the state came out with a report essentially looking at all the cities and counties and what financial situation they are in. The surprising thing with the report was that Harrisonburg, Virginia, is right near the top as far as potential for a fiscal stress. I'm not saying that we're going under, but it's a reminder that we have a lot on the table. Some very exciting stuff. We're going to need a lot of money to make that happen. I don't think it is all going to happen, but it's time for us to sit down and work it out. What's the priority? Obviously leaning towards the schools, absolutely major, but figure out what's the best way to make everything work and become a reality without ending up the same boat as Petersburg.
We're going to transition to your questions. If you can give us just a second, we'll come around and collect. Don't worry if we don't get it on the first round, we're going to come back through. And Tim Ripke and I are going to swap places here.
Okay, so for the round of audience questions, audience participation, we will give the members of the panel 90 seconds to consider their responses. And you don't have to use the full time if you don't like, but you're welcome to use the 90 seconds. So for the first question, and I think we'll start, just keep cycling through. And so Dina, I believe you're next. So this topic has to do with JMU. It seems that recently student-citizen relations have begun to decline. The city passed noise ordinances last year and this year, which has taken a lot of time and energy from police. Do you have a plan to attempt to improve JMU-Harrisonburg relationships?
So this is another opportunity for us to build healthy relationships between community and our students. I do feel like that we need to definitely build a relationship because our students, our JMU students, all of our students are important to us. So we do need to hear their concerns. However, they need to understand that being a part of our city, our community, there's responsibility that comes with that. Especially if you're going to live beside residents who are not 19 and 20 anymore. And that's, you know, I mean, that's reality. So I think what is important, and I've actually have stated this to the students when I'm on campus, speaking to them, that they need to understand that they are important to us, as they are. But they also need to come to us and participate in city council meetings and maybe committees. And that might be something that I would work towards, is have different committees for them to actually come serve on, so that we can build that relationship and get to know one another. And by that, we can respect each other's boundaries and know how to deal with each other on a more positive relationship.
We could continue down the line if you'd like, Paul.
Well, I think the idea that Dina just brought up is very interesting, actually, of a committee of JMU students. I'm a former JMU student. I graduated in 2004 and never participated in any of the large parties that seem to have generated the new noise ordinance, but I do recognize it was a significant issue, and it was one that was difficult for me. But I think the important thing here is listening, and also not conflating the JMU student body with the governing body of JMU and what they're looking to do, because I think the students might not have agreed with the decision that was made, but that doesn't necessarily mean everybody affiliated with JMU disagreed with it. I do think it was a troubling issue, but it certainly won't be our last. And so we need to bring them into the fold, and we need to work with JMU. Obviously, it's a very important institution in our community, and one that continues to serve us, and we need to, in return, continue to serve it as best we can.
I'm under the impression that the 24-hour ordinance was put into effect, that the police at times might have to use it to correct the situation, but I'm also under the impression the police are most concerned about kids who have partied too much. They need more attention than some noise gatherers do. I agree that I think one of the best ways to maybe gain recognition of the city's attitude is to see if we can get some more students interested in working with us, either with the council or various groups that are in the city, to give them a better perspective as to what they are doing and how they actually affect people. Maybe they'd appreciate it just a little bit more. At least that would be the hope of it all. But all in all, I mean, the kids are good, and nobody's trying to ruin a good time for them, I'm sure.
Well, I'd actually say that we're really at a historic high, as far as I can tell, in terms of level of communication and cooperation between the city and JMU administration. If you know the history around here, a lot of it was these two bodies really functioning in parallel universes and really didn't even communicate. We do on a regular basis. Anybody, whether there's 2 or 3 of the people on my left who end up on council here at the election, we have a liaison committee with JMU, meets regularly. And to echo something that Paul said, in our communication with them, they were supportive of the ordinance changes that we recently looked at. And I'll just say quickly, as I said when we took this up at council, a lot of the near-term issue is Old Town neighborhood. It's really a land use problem. It's a problem with apartments really being in the middle of an established neighborhood that if we were doing this from scratch, we would never let in there. The good news is we fixed that some years ago. But the bad news, if you want to call it that, is these properties are grandfathered. You've got incompatible uses next to each other. You had a near-term run where it seemed like, I think the culture was saying these were great party houses. So we were on a bit of a collision course. I'm cautiously optimistic that we're making progress, and to a large extent, it really is about sort of the internal cultural thing to try to get folks to not see these houses in the middle of residential areas as the great party houses.
Thank you. Next question for Paul to begin. It's on reentry. Locally, the Harrisonburg, Rockingham, Page Reentry Council, the Criminal Justice Board, and other organizations are concerned with ex-offender community reentry and reducing recidivism. If elected, what specific measures will you take to support reentry efforts for incarcerated citizens returning to our community?
I'd like to consider some alternative options to jail, certainly, and I think I'm not the only one that feels this way. I think there's a lot of people in our community that are very vocal about this, and I think there's even more people in our community that aren't so vocal. And I think looking at the country right now, there's some things that are happening that are very interesting to me in regards to this question, because as we see marijuana being decriminalized in certain states and sometimes legalized in certain states, you know, this is something that I can see is going to spread across the country and have a large impact on incarceration rates, which we know are the highest in the entire world right now. And as somebody living in Harrisonburg and knowing the people that I know here and the community that I know here, I know that we as a community don't really want to participate in that level of incarceration. And so I'm very interested in working with the groups that we have here that are invested in this process and invested in alternative solutions. And fortunately, we're in a place where social justice is a very big thing, and there's a lot of people that are very well read on social justice. With EMU, just a rock shot from downtown, we have very good resources, and I think that we can make some real progress and again be a great example.
I think that there are people incarcerated that really shouldn't be there. Today they would be considered very much on the minor side of any criminal offenses. And I also believe that when people are incarcerated, they pay their crime, they rehab, they come out, they get a job. Yeah, well, let's welcome them back into society. They should be, at that point, ready to maybe vote again. That would be kind of good. I think a little lighter sentences for what I would consider misdemeanors would be in order. Would also save us a little money on the incarceration trail. So yeah, I think these things are to be worked out. I think there's people working on them now. So we will progress in that direction, which I believe is where we are going, to see if we can rectify that situation and bring it up to date.
At least in my thinking in this, a lot of it really breaks down to two issues: over-incarceration and reentry. And the question was really about reentry, so I'm going to try to stick to that for a second. And the tough thing about that, a lot of that really is cultural. You know, there's an old expression that we've used about someone paying their debt to society, and yet that seems to have kind of fallen into disuse or lack of respect. Because it seems very clear to me that if I could wave the magic wand and release everyone who's in jail right now because of over-incarceration, and then when we let them out, we still give ourselves permission to treat these people as second-class citizens, we're not accomplishing what we need to do as a society, and we're hurting ourselves. Because the fact is, it's the best thing that we can do is to help folks reintegrate into the society so they can be productive and that they can help out their community. But I will say quickly on incarceration, I'll just say I'm agreeing with the comments I've heard so far in terms of pretty much anything we can do to reduce the incarceration rate. We want to look at it. It's a very tough thing, and a lot of things I've talked about, I talk about it being a many-headed monster, because one of the problems we run into is there are not that many things that Harrisonburg can do acting unilaterally. So many things we have are joint or whatever, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop looking at them. That doesn't mean we're going to stop talking about them. And by golly, anybody who's got any great ideas of things we should be doing that we don't keep them to yourself. Again, whether I've got 2.5 months to work on this or 4 years and 2.5 months.
I agree with everyone who has spoken so far. You know, with me, I think that as a city, we need to make sure that we are supporting our ex-offenders, and that we're not just writing them off or making them feel like they're second-class citizens. We need to welcome them home, and we know that in order for them to be successful, they have to connect with something or someone, meaning they have to connect with a job, they have to connect with family, they have to connect with education to better themselves, or or in housing, in order for them to get back on their feet. And so as a community, I think it's our responsibility to help them do that. If that means that we work with companies to make sure that they are able to work, or work with realtors and landlords to see if they can get housing. But in order for them to be successful and not go back, they need to feel connected. And that's what we need to do as a friendly city community, is to welcome them home and take care of them and help them get back on their feet.
Okay, the next question with George beginning has to do with transportation. Considering that we have so many new immigrants and university students who don't necessarily have access to a vehicle, how can we improve bus, public transportation service to nearby towns like Stanton and the closest major U.S. city, Washington, D.C.?
That is a major problem, particularly for the immigrant population. They get to Harrisonburg, they get settled in, they find a job, and it's in Dayton, and they don't have a car, or it's in Bridgewater, or it's up in Broadway. I think there is a need to sit down and talk about it as far as the transportation department, to see that we can develop some more avenues of public transportation, develop a little more connectivity in the area, that these people could get to work. Very important that they are able to accomplish that. That raises their income levels, it raises their self-esteem, it puts it all, it helps to put it all together. And there's a need, there's a gap there, folks, and I think there's a need that we need to fill that. Put that on the table with some of the other projects we're talking about tonight. I think that becomes very important, particularly for the immigrant community.
Well, the quick answer to that question is get us a grant somewhere where we can expand the service. This is, I referred to our fair housing study, and this is a point of emphasis in that study, the needs that we have in the community. And frankly, actually, our transportation department was commended by the consultant doing it, not so much because of what we've accomplished, because we have a lot that we could do, but in terms of their openness and willingness to both talk with them and members of the community and try to expand our service and reach out to folks where we can. I think we've actually got a respectable track record on that. But it's a tough issue. I mean, stop and think about it for a second. We're looking at our fair housing study. It's funny the person mentioned JMU, because if you need to get to and from JMU, our system's really pretty good. That's what it's built on. That's where the ridership is, that's where the grant funding is, and so we've got a system built around JMU. And before you get too upset about that, stop and think about the public transportation system of just about everywhere. Try to get from the periphery of DC to somewhere else in DC without going into the center of DC. I even read an article recently in New York, which you think of as having a tremendous public transportation system, and what's the issue? These vans that have picked up to finding corridors where people want to go, they've now got these unregulated vans that have been going on for years and they don't know what to do with them, because even in New York City, there are areas where to get from one point of the periphery to the other, the public transportation hasn't kept up. But we'll keep at it.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most frustrating issues that I've come across when I'm out speaking to folks, and it's transportation. And it's, it's up there with the high school. So we know that even though our public transportation department is doing well, there is still issues.